morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us from around the world. My name is Mani Jad, and I am the founder and executive director of the Institute for Middle East Options. It is a real pleasure to welcome you to today's public briefing, the third in our series on current security developments in the region. Today, we will turn our focus to Lebanon and to the many pressures that it's confronting at the moment, shaped by conflict, crisis, and deep uncertainty. The country faces mounting pressure at its borders, persistent political fragility at home, and an economic crisis that has already pushed far too many people into exhaustion, insecurity, and loss. As violence intensifies, the human cost rises with it in lives lost, in communities displaced, and in the further erosion of a national landscape already under profound strain. This public briefing gives us an opportunity to step back from the immediacy of events and consider the broader picture with greater care. It invites us to reflect on several urgent questions at the heart of this moment. Where is Lebanon heading under this level of pressure? What space still remains for stability, dialogue, and recovery? And how should this moment be understood in the wider regional landscape? At IMEO, we believe that serious, informed dialogue is essential, particularly in moments defined by uncertainty. And that is precisely why we are here today. We are very pleased to bring together speakers whose insight and expertise will help us think more carefully about the pressures shaping Lebanon at this critical time. Before we turn to our discussion, if any questions come to mind for our panelists, I invite you to write them in the Q&A box along with your name and country, and we will answer as many questions as possible. It is now my great pleasure to turn the floor over to our moderator, Dr. H.A. Hellyer, Senior Associate Fellow at the Royal United Service Institute for Defense and Security Studies, who will guide us through today's discussion. Over to you, Dr. Hellyer.
Thank you, Mani, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you all are. And thank you to the Institute for Middle East Options for convening this discussion at a particularly consequential moment. My name is Dr. Hisham Hellyer. I'm a Senior Associate Fellow, as mentioned, at the Royal United Service Institute for Defense and Security Studies, and a Senior Fellow at the Center for American Progress. My work focuses on geopolitics and geoeconomics across this region. We're meeting at a moment of unusual diplomatic importance and movement, but also profound structural fragility in Lebanon. In the past 24 hours, we've seen what many are describing as a historic development, direct talks in Washington between Lebanese and Israeli representatives under American auspices, the first such engagement in decades. And yet, those talks have already exposed a central paradox. On the one hand, the Lebanese state is attempting to negotiate around ceasefire and sovereignty. On the other, Israel's core demands around Hezbollah seem to be demands that the Lebanese state is unable to deliver, especially at a time when much of Lebanon's territory is under illegal occupation of the state of Israel. More critically still, Hezbollah itself has rejected the legitimacy of these talks outright, despite the fact that the government of which it is actually a part has accepted this track. So what we're seeing is not simply a negotiation between two states, but a negotiation in which there is a great disparity of power between them, and also not full control over power within each of their borders. At the same time, Lebanon's economic crisis continues to deepen. Discussions underway around potential emergency IMF financing. That raises a parallel question. Even if there is diplomatic movement on the security track, can the Lebanese state convert that into economic stabilization? And all of this sits within a wider regional context, particularly US-Iran dynamics, which continue to shape the ceiling and the limits of what is even possible here. So the question for this panel is not simply whether diplomacy is happening, it clearly is, but whether Lebanon as a state is capable of translating that diplomacy into meaningful and sustainable outcomes in the near term. enforcing its sovereignty and monopoly over force and power on its own territory vis-a-vis non-state actors such as Hezbollah, and also removing any occupation forces from the state of Israel, which again continues to occupy and threaten all sorts of catastrophe on the state of Lebanon and its people. To that end, I'm very, very pleased that we have such a distinguished panel today, four wonderful speakers, four Lebanese speakers, four people that know Lebanon very well, including people who are there at the moment and people who have been there quite recently as well. And they include Maya Gebeily, who is the bureau chief for Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan at Reuters. She previously covered the region for sorry, something's happened here. Yeah, she covered the Middle East for the Thomson Reuters Foundation, reporting on climate change, technology, and socioeconomic developments around the region. And she was also a reporter for AFP for 6 years, including postings in Baghdad and Beirut, and has reported as a freelancer from Beirut, Istanbul, and the Kurdistan region of Iraq. We also have with us today, I'm happy to say, Dania Khatib, Dr. Dania. I'm so sorry, something's happened with the screen here. Here we go. Dania Koleilat Khatib is co-founder and director of the Research Center for Cooperation and Peace Building, RCCP, a Lebanese NGO focused on track to diplomacy. She's the author of several books, including the Syrian crisis, effects on regional and international relations, the Arab lobby, and others. Her most recent book, Regional Competition and Conflicts in MENA, From the Arab Spring to the Gaza War, was published in 2025, and she's a weekly columnist for Arab news as well. So we really have a really good panelist there as well. Makram Rabah is an assistant professor of history at the American University of Beirut. He holds a PhD in Lebanon in history from Georgetown University and a law degree from the Lebanese University. He's an author of A Campus at War, Student Politics at the American University of Beirut, and Conflict on Mount Lebanon, the Druze, the Maronites, and Collective Memory, which was published in 2020. And Firas Maksad is managing director for the MENA region practice at Eurasia Group, where he oversees analysis of regional geopolitics, macroeconomics, and U.S. foreign policy. He previously served as a senior director at the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C., and is taught at George Washington University. And I'm sure is a familiar face to many of us who see him frequently on international media, including CNN, BBC, and Bloomberg. So as you can see, a very distinguished panel. We're very grateful to have all of them. And I'd like to start with Maya Gebeily. I'd like to ask our panelists to focus not only on diagnosis, but also what's realistically actionable in the coming weeks, and to keep their comments to 3 to 4 minutes at a time, following which I'll ask each of them a question, and then we'll open it up to a discussion more broadly. With that, Maya, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Sham. I'm the only member here who is not a doctor, so I have to say I feel very out of my league. So thank you everyone for this invitation.
I'm good company. I'm not a PhD either.
All right, there we go. Okay,
and you both have far more qualifications than most doctors, including myself.
I don't know. We're the failures for our parents, you know. I mean, it's a really interesting time to be having this discussion, in particular at this exact moment. Actually, we've been tracking the Israeli Security Cabinet's meeting this evening to discuss a possible ceasefire for Lebanon. So I guess we're the second most important gathering on the subject this evening. And I mean, the issues that I've been thinking about, Isham, really in the past couple of weeks. I mean, primarily, of course, what's front of mind is really the humanitarian toll that this war has been taking on Lebanon. There have been more than 2,000 killed, more than 1.2 million people displaced. These are numbers numbers that I think, are very difficult to swallow for many who are abroad, because it's hard to imagine what that looks like. But in our daily reporting, when we're hearing about, morgues full, people having to do temporary burials for their loved ones because the morgues are so full and because they can't take them to their hometowns to be buried, these constant stories of the kind of human toll is really front of mind for all of us who are doing, the on-the-ground reporting from Lebanon. But we're also thinking about, what's going to come down the line. And I think the biggest question for us, and what we've been trying to report on and really get into the, the diplomatic angle and the political angle, is what is the sustainable way in which this ends. I mean, many of us, were tracking the 2024 ceasefire that ended the last round of hostilities between Hezbollah and Israel. It was a ceasefire that we were all very happy to see because there was 2 months of very brutal war. But it was very quickly apparent that it was not a sustainable MO, because you had Israeli strikes continue, Hezbollah continue to rearm during that period, Israeli troops occupying 5 points in southern Lebanon, and therefore giving Hezbollah just kind of reviving its raison d'etre and saying, look, Israel is actually occupying Lebanese territory, that's why you need our arms. So it was a very kind of unsustainable framework in which to try to have a sustainable ceasefire. So we're all trying to think about, now, as these different tracks are taking place, the kind of Pakistan track between the US and Iran, and then the Washington-led talks between the Israelis and the Lebanese, which are, of course, a massive milestone. What is the type of agreement that can be produced that would be sustainable and that would be workable on all sides, given Lebanon's profound divisions over Hezbollah's arsenal? So this is kind of the main question that we're asking, and many of you here might remember last year when Ambassador Tom Barak was very deeply engaged in Lebanon, and the Lebanese kept asking him for guarantees from the US, and he kept publicly saying, there are no guarantees, we can't compel Israel to do anything. This was a really this kind of really derailed any appetite in Lebanon for a diplomatic track if the US was not going to back us up. So these are the questions that many Lebanese officials are asking, interlocutors here. What are the kind of points that are going to be, that we can be secure in, and what are the sustainable ways that a ceasefire can be achieved? And then, of course, the other element really that we're thinking about is the prospects of sectarian tensions worsening within Lebanon internally. The Lebanese civil war, started 51 years ago this month. It's front of mind for many as well, when we're seeing kind of on a local level, on a very local kind of neighborhood level, these tensions starting to rise. And so these are the main kind of two pockets of issues that we're very much thinking about here these days.
Thank you so much, Maya, and for modeling keeping to time. I'm very pleased about that. I want to hand over to Makram. I do have questions for you, Maya, but I'm going to keep that until the end. I'd like to hear very much from Makram Rabah from his perspective, what we're looking at right now. So please, Makram, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Hisham, and thank you everyone for attending, and thank you for this great panel. Well, actually, everyone is hopeful, especially that with what we saw yesterday in Washington, D.C., which is indeed a historic event. However, this is only the start of a long track which the Lebanese have to pursue, particularly the Lebanese state. But what was important yesterday, that there was a clear demarcation between the Lebanese state and Hezbollah. Hezbollah acts as if they are members of the opposition, where in fact they are part and parcel of the cabinet, and they have one of their most lethal weapons, which is Speaker of Parliament Nabi Berri. Obviously, Nabi Berri now is trying his acrobatics by trying to get the Saudis to intervene, not because he cares about the Israeli peace track, but rather he doesn't want to relinquish any sort of powers within the system. He still wants to be the kingmaker, and this is particularly what's so dangerous about everything that's happening. This is something that we have been saying it over and over again. The most potent weapon that Hezbollah has is sectarianism and its alliance with the Lebanese political establishment that basically normalizes an Iranian-led militia. At the moment, I do urge you never to use Hezbollah when you're referring to the fights in the south of Lebanon. The operational command of the fighters of Hezbollah are all members of the IRGC. We have the United Colors of Terrorism fighting the south of Lebanon, and this will not stop. Unfortunately, people assume that Hezbollah will go away, and even if Iran is weakened, simply Hezbollah will be weakened. Our main problem starts at the top of this pyramid, and basically starts with the former commander of the army who refuses to act like a president. And here I'm referring to President Joseph Aoun, who over and over again dragged his feet and ultimately is partly responsible for what happened. There is one way out of this, no other way out of this: the total disarmament of Hezbollah. Because as we stand, the Israelis will definitely bend, but they will not break, meaning that they might indulge Trump with a ceasefire. However, the ceasefire will not include the immediate return of 1.5 million refugees. They are not displaced. These people will become permanent refugees, and this would lead us to sectarian tensions, especially that as soon as the US-Iran peace talks were announced, that the resolution was announced, Hezbollah were planning a coup against the government of Nawaf Salam. As it stands, I think our only bet is for Nawaf Salam and the government of Nawaf Salam to continue doing what it's doing, basically not budge when it comes to sovereign decisions. And this is something that we can build on, because at the end of the day, realistically, we cannot disarm Hezbollah physically. What we have to do, and this is something perhaps many of you have heard me say, we have to counter the narrative of Hezbollah. That starts with the idea that Hezbollah is a Lebanese entity, which is not. It has the weapons to deter Israel, which is not. And more importantly, that Hezbollah, and we should stress this, had invited occupation. This is the first time in the history of humanity a so-called resistance movement has invited occupation, and this will not change anytime soon. There are a lot of challenges, but this is a Groundhog Day. We will continue repeating this scenario over and over again. And in my honest opinion, at the end of these hostilities, if Hezbollah is to remain under any form, we can really forget about Lebanon. Lebanon will no longer be. There will be something else, but certainly Lebanon that we grew up loving will no longer be around. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Makram. I appreciate your perspective. Dania, we give the floor to you, please.
Thank you, Hisham. I cannot talk about everything because we have 3 to 5 minutes. I want to talk about 3 points. One of them is the dynamic between the state and Hezbollah. One of them is Hezbollah and the current war, like the whole war, and Iran. And one of them, the Lebanese government and the Israeli, like the negotiation. Well, regarding the Lebanese government and Hezbollah, Hezbollah is not the first non-state actor. You know, you had the IRA, for example, the PKK, but what's the difference? For example, the IRA, they disarmed, but in return, they had like a political agreement. You know, the British government was pounding them, and they reached with them the agreement. Same way with the Turkish government and the PKK. The difference between Hezbollah is the government wants to reach an agreement with them, but it has no leverage. It cannot give them guarantees, and the American don't want to give them guarantees. So the American actually weakened the state, because they put the Lebanese state in a position where it cannot reach any agreement with Hezbollah. And Hezbollah tells you, unless we have guarantees, we will not disarm. I mean, the IRA did not disarm until they got political settlement. Same with the PKK, though like the Turkish army is far, far, far. I mean, there's no comparison with the Lebanese army. So you're asking them to give the only card they have and not giving them anything in return. I don't think that's realistic. They will not do that. Talking about the second point I want to discuss, which is Iran. Iran, its position in this war. As you see, after October 7, Iran did not interfere. Hezbollah opened Jabhat al-Musanada, support, but it was tit for tat. They didn't want to go all in against Israel. So what happened basically, Israel, after they finished Hamas, they went on to Hezbollah, and then Assad fell, and then Iran was hit. And actually, Iran and Hezbollah had several assumptions that were wrong. One of them is that the Israeli will not fight long. Number two, that the US will ask Hezbollah to stop in an election year. Number three, that the Israeli will not sacrifice their hostages. And the three of them were wrong. So now it's totally the opposite. Is Iran and its proxies are going all in. So regardless, so when the war started on Iran, immediately Hezbollah went in, and they feel that it's all or nothing. So they're going all in. And they're being very useful actually for Iran, because even what they throw at the rocket, it overwhelms the defense system. So this way, the missiles coming from Iran go easier on Israel. The third thing I want to talk about is about the Lebanese government negotiation with Israel. I know everyone is hyping about it, but for me, I think, if I want to say it politely, what they are doing, the Lebanese government, is unwise. If I want to be blunt, and I will say strategically stupid, because you don't negotiate when you have zero leverage and the other part has all the leverage. How is the Lebanese government thinking in any way they can get anything from the Israeli? Salam was a bit banking on the French. The Israeli ambassador went out and said, listen, the French have nothing to do with it. They have no role and they will not get any role. So I think if Lebanon wants to get anything like half decent, it has to be part of a regional deal. And what's really, 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 funny or actually sad is Iran has been using Lebanon for 4 decades to flex its muscle with Israel, calling us al-Jabha al-Amamiyya, the first front. So once we get a chance, so we can use Iran to flex our muscle with Israel, to get anything from Israel, we say, no, we don't want. I don't know, they're going to negotiate with Israel. I don't know what are they banking on to get anything from Israel. Are they planning, are we going to charm the Israeli to get anything out of them? Because Israeli are not going to give us anything. I don't understand. So I think actually the direct negotiation, not because, okay, some people say we should not be direct or not direct because we shouldn't recognize them. It's not the issue. The issue is we're going to a negotiation and we have zero leverage. So we have zero chance to get anything from the Israeli. And I'll stop it here and we'll leave it to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Dania. So I want to encourage everybody to listen very closely to Firas. I do regularly, as I turn on my TV and see him on CNN on a very regular basis. He's an excellent analyst, and I look forward to his comments. And my apologies again.
You are very kind, and I hope I live up to half of what you just put forward. Listen, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me, Hisham, Manny, and all the friends that are on the line. A lot's been said, and so I'll limit my comments, and I'll take an outside-in approach rather than the opposite. Folks who are on the ground, like Makram, Maya, I don't know where Dania is, but certainly much more capable of talking about the nuances of Lebanese politics and the implications. I'll say the following, and I'll start short-term, and then I'll talk about Lebanon more broadly and where we think it's going. Let's start with the issue of the day that many Lebanese obviously are prioritizing, which is a ceasefire. And from where I'm sitting in DC, it's just absolutely key not to have this ceasefire come about as a result of the Iranian precondition for negotiations. And we've already seen that those negotiations took place despite much of the theater around whether or not the Iranian delegation is going to take to the plane and land in Islamabad without a ceasefire in Lebanon. They did. And we were much closer to a ceasefire last week in the lead up to these, as Maya put it, momentous talks, direct talks between Israel and Lebanon here in Washington. We were closer to a ceasefire when there was some hope that a deal was won within reach in Islamabad. As it was clear that the American and Iranian delegations were going to depart Islamabad with no deal, the US side, at least, the Trump administration, was keen to put off a ceasefire because, again, the ceasefire in Lebanon will come at the end of a process and not as a result of an Iranian precondition. What we have seen since then, though, is clear and marked de-escalation. That's where Trump has been leaning in on Bibi. Beirut has not been a target since those horrific attacks now almost a week ago. North of 300 people lost their lives. Hundreds of them were Hezbollah militants, presumably getting ready to undermine the Lebanese government, but many more were civilians. So you are seeing Beirut being sidelined. Israel has not fully achieved its mission. And I have to tell you, in Israel, there's an ongoing debate of what the mission is. Is it to dismantle and disarm Hezbollah? Well, if you're going to have to do that, you're going to have to occupy most of Lebanon. And that's simply not on the cards. Or is it simply to set up a buffer zone, this cornet line of 7 to 10 kilometers, to guard against direct line of firing munitions, the anti-tank, which Israel doesn't have a very effective response to. And therefore, by creating a 7 to 8 kilometer buffer zone, you've solved your most immediate problem in Lebanon. I would argue to you that that's going to be the achievable aim for Israel. And for that, they need a little bit more time. There's ongoing battles in the south, Gebeily being the most important and significant of them all. And so a ceasefire is within reach, but we're not there yet, and will come after an Iranian-American understanding and not before that. Longer term, clearly the U.S. insistence, and yesterday Secretary Rubio chairing the meeting between the two sides, is an indication of American determination to see Lebanon exit the Iranian orbit. Now, the Iranians don't have to accept that, and that's all subject to the negotiations that are ongoing. If history is to prove right in the past for all American administrations, the order of priority has always been the nuclear issue, the ballistic missile capability, and then the proxies. And when it does come to the proxies, and I have to tell you, lead negotiators that I've spoken to on the US side have always done, we never really ever got to the issue of proxies, let alone resolving it. Even then, there are priorities over and above Lebanon, starting with the Houthis in Yemen, given the geopolitical importance and the challenge that poses. So we don't know if the Iranians will concede Lebanon or Lebanon will be contested and challenged for some time. But for all the reasons that Makram and Maya and Dania and others sort of pointed out, this is unlikely to be a smooth process for Lebanon as it begins to exit the Iranian orbit and Iranian domination, Syrian dominations before that, decades of Syrian and Iranian domination. And the government in Beirut begins to reassert a semblance of state sovereignty over its territory. I can say that the trajectory is one in which Lebanon exits that orbit, and is clearly we have the most pro-Western government in a generation in Lebanon with Nawaf Salam, and to some extent with President Aoun. But I expect that will be a very bumpy process as Lebanon moves in that direction. I would very quickly, because I do want to make this point, that even after the issue of Iran and its influence are settled in Lebanon, and that's a long-term process of years, if not months, Lebanon has to come to terms of where it sits in the region as the region itself transforms. And while Iran was sort of the defining issue, Iran set the terms and the dynamics in the region for years. The access, the ability to project power, the IRGC boasting about controlling 4 Arab capitals, that's no longer going to be the case. The region has changed, Iran is diminished. Increasingly, the region is going to organize itself around the issue of Israel and Israel's projection of power. Don't believe me, listen to Bibi Netanyahu, he'll tell you he's fighting on 7 fronts and winning every single one of them. Increasingly, threat perception is less focused on Iran and focused on Israel as a result of that. And you have a camp that is benefiting and betting on Israeli power. I would loosely term that the Abrahamic coalition, as I did in a foreign policy essay a couple of months ago. And then you have a counter coalition, which is led by Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Pakistan, and increasingly Egypt. And those are the countries that are concerned about unchecked Israeli power and are trying to balance against it in the new and emerging Middle East. So Lebanon is going to have to do some hard thinking and try to determine where in this new Middle East they're going to fit, in which camp are they going to play. And I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Firas. Very methodological and analytical. I have some questions for you, but I'm going to ask my questions in order of the panelists, and I'll begin with Maya. You're in Beirut. What are you hearing about the legitimacy of these talks? What Firas just mentioned, we're really thinking, medium to long term. In the short term, the divisions within Lebanon itself, what do you see in that regard? How unified is the Lebanese position in practice?
I mean, if we're talking like man on the street level, it's as divisive as divided as any other issue in Lebanon. So you'll hear the completely, you'll hear polar opposite perspectives. A couple of colleagues of mine spoke to some young men today who lost their mother in the strikes last week in Beirut, and they were saying that they don't believe that any track of negotiations with Israel would be legitimate. We also hear the complete opposite. We hear from families who are saying that whatever it takes, whatever track it is, just let it stop. So we're hearing completely, on a level of the population, we're hearing completely different perspectives. Some who think that as a principle there shouldn't be negotiations with Israel. Some who think just like Dania was saying, that we don't have the strategic leverage, that the Lebanese government doesn't have the leverage that it needs to have, neither vis-a-vis the Israelis nor vis-a-vis Hezbollah, to be able to reach any kind of meaningful settlement. So we're hearing across the board radically different things, and even what I'm hearing from Lebanese officials can sometimes be contradictory in the same conversation, because I think there's a bit of a scramble within the government to try to figure out what's going to stick and what's going to work, and they're under immense pressure from Hezbollah at the same time, who will only obviously endorse the Pakistan track. And so the Lebanese officials who are trying to kind of untangle this Gordian's knot and figure out how do we get something that sticks, that doesn't alienate the US, because we need them and we want to be in their sphere, but we can't alienate Hezbollah because it's a powerful, singularly armed group within the country, and if we kind of contradict them this directly, then we might see civil conflict. These are the tensions that I'll hear even within the same conversations. In a span of 5-6 minutes, I'll hear the same those contradictions with the same Lebanese officials. So it's a total miss, and I think that really gets to the point that Dania was saying earlier, is that it's we're not in the best position to be negotiating this. And I think it's really telling that President Aoun made his call for direct talks in the second week of March, the second week of the war, and he didn't get a response from the Israeli Prime Minister until last week, when so much had already been achieved on the battlefield vis-a-vis the Israelis. So it's not a strong position for the Lebanese to be negotiating from, and I think they're trying to scramble to find whatever kind of steady ground they can as they move ahead.
If you had to give, and I hesitate to ask this, especially somebody who used to do opinion polls, if you had to put like a broad sort of picture about Lebanese public opinion on the talks, would you say that broadly they support the fact that the government has sent a delegation to Washington, or that broadly they don't? Or is it really even more divided than that?
It's genuinely hard to say. I mean, I don't know of any opinion polling now that could give an accurate number, and I wouldn't want to say, I don't want to say that the people that I've been speaking to who are in Beirut or in the south or in the north are a representation of kind of Lebanese public opinion.
You don't
so
see
I wouldn't
overwhelming one way or the other. It could be, it's very,
No,
very
I hear
difficult to
very
assess.
strong, a very strong polarization. Some and some even who are not Iran aligned, who say I'm not pro Hezbollah, I'm not pro Iran, I don't want Iran to be dominating my country, but I also don't think that the track with the US is going to lead us anywhere, and it could be more strategic for us to pursue the Pakistan track. So I really mean, like, you hear a complete kind of all across the board opinions of where this sits.
Okay, great. Thank you. Appreciate that. Makram, after having heard all of that, I'm sure you're also considering some of this, but the question that I had for you is, you spoke a great deal about, of course, Hezbollah, the need to disarm Hezbollah, and I can imagine many people agreeing with you in principle. But a question does come up. Would you entertain the idea that there is a risk that if Hezbollah is pushed too hard at this stage, the consequences could fracture Lebanon internally? Do you think that that's a legitimate risk to be considering, or actually, on the contrary, the risk of not pushing harder and harder on Hezbollah, you actually risk even more the fracturing of Lebanon, as an inaction in this regard is even worse than the action?
I don't want to come across as someone who's endorsing violence, but I think if you avoid the confrontation now, it will be much harder for you to escape a bigger confrontation. People assume that Hezbollah are powerful, but when Hezbollah tried to use its weapons internally, they were giving a good beating. It is very easy for them to take Beirut as a city because Beirut doesn't have the tribal affiliation which exists in other parts of the world. More importantly, while the problem with them that they really don't really match.
I'm sorry, Makram. I don't mean to interrupt, but I couldn't hear you said Beirut doesn't have the tribal affiliation that exists in other parts of the world, or did you mean in Lebanon?
Of Lebanon, of Mount Lebanon.
Sorry. Okay, thank you.
And the peripheries. My only concern is that Hezbollah doesn't really care about sectarian violence because they would like to pick a fight with the Maronites or the Druze, and they would like to see disgruntled Druze or Maronites, and sorry I'm using these sectarian terms, take a revenge over, let's say, innocent displaced people in the region. Because at the end of the day, this will translate into more tribal affiliation. Hezbollah is powerful not because of only Iranian support. It's powerful because the President of the Republic deals with the Shiites of Lebanon as subjects to Harakat Amal and Hezbollah. The way that they are going about it, the non-existence of the army and the ISF on the streets of Beirut is frightening. When we have a president of Mauritius visit Lebanon, we have more security on the streets, and this is no minor detail. I think ultimately, if the Lebanese army doesn't confront Hezbollah and at least eradicate their security cells in civilian areas, because at the end of the day, as Firas was mentioning, these synchronized hits in different parts of Lebanon were targeting Hezbollah operatives who were using civilian locations as human targets. And this is something that we should never take lightly. The IRGC were hiding out in hotel rooms, attack about in Hazmiye and in Raushi. And this is something I don't understand. I do understand they don't want to clash with the Shiites of Lebanon, but why would I allow for an IRGC/Persian officer to roam around Lebanon? And this is something that the Lebanese will take they will react to this if this continues. Our problem is that we are being pushed to confrontation. However, I do warn anyone who wants to use civil war. Civil wars require money and require time. No one is interested in pumping money into Lebanon, and none of the people are training, and the militia, the other parties who used to have militias at the moment, aren't geared towards war. However, this will lead to the integration of Lebanon, because at the end of the day, there's no going back to these. The buffer zone, which the Israelis are now carving out, will be in no man's land. And there's no way for these people to go back home unless the total disarmament. And this is where the tough love of the President of the Republic and other parties, which in a way have provided the sectarian backbone for Hezbollah to become a normal party. This is a party that has an AK-47 on its banner. And this is not the IRA. The IRA, when they got what they wanted, they disarmed. We are talking about a Secretary General of Hezbollah who saw the rockets being thrown at Israel just like us. He had no idea whatsoever that the IRGC decided to start the war. And he will not end this war. This is something very important to keep in mind when dealing with Hezbollah.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to have one slight follow-up, but just really, just because of time, as brief an answer to this as possible. You said it will be the buffer zone will become a no man's land.
Yes.
Am I to understand that, though, you would have complete confidence that if Hezbollah agreed, for example, to disarmament today, or the army removed it by force, that the Israelis would withdraw completely from the buffer zone?
Yes, I do. And this is something which I know there's a lot of people that keep on saying, look what Smotrich are saying, look what Gebeily is saying. The reality is, back in 2000, the Israeli army unilaterally withdrew from Lebanon. What did we do? We left the people of the south as hostages for Iran and for Syria. At the end of the day, remember, we were negotiating. The idea is that Hezbollah, since ever, were always talking about the Shib'a farms and Kfar Shuba. Now they're saying geography is not important. Let us make them invade, and we can. Who will rebuild this destroyed land if Iran is still Iran, which is targeting the Gulf, Hisham, will not bankroll the reconstruction of the South, and this is very problematic.
Understood. Thank you, Makram. Dania. So we've heard a great deal about the regional conflict, and of course, quite naturally, we're focusing on the U.S. and Iran. But I'd like to know your perspective, especially as somebody who's been involved in many regional discussions, track 2 discussions. What role do you think regional actors realistically can play at this stage? I'm thinking particular of 2 that Firas mentioned, which are Saudi and Egypt. Saudi clearly had a much wider role in Lebanon in the past. Egypt seems to be flexing its muscles a little bit, not so much on Lebanon per se, but especially on these talks between the US and Iran. And perhaps there are other powers that you might want to sort of mention here, closer, such as Syria, but even maybe further away, such as France. How realistic do you think it is that there will be other players, and mention others that I haven't mentioned, that can have an effective role at this time?
Thank you, Hisham. But I just want to comment on what Makram said, because I did a lot of track 2, and I had a lot of conversation with people from Hezbollah. And actually, they've said clearly that they agreed on the disarmament as a concept, but no one offered them the guarantees. No one offered them the guarantees that Lebanon will not be hit, and no one offered them guarantees that they will not be targeted. They might be lying, but at least we can't tell, because no one really offered the guarantees. So, we can't tell, because they said we asked for the guarantees and we were not given. So the IRA were giving guarantees, we're giving a political settlement.
Dania, if I could, sorry, again, not to cut you off, but just so that it's clear to everybody, when you say guarantees to Hezbollah as individuals within
guarantees,
the group,
they were offering, is asking 2 guarantees. Lebanon will not be hit. We know Israel did.
By the Israelis. Okay.
Yeah, the Israeli hit Lebanon 10,000 times. They broke the ceasefire, and not to target them. They were targeting them, hunting them down one by one, one by one. And the other thing was, Makram is so sure that they will withdraw. I think it's a clear case of ethnic cleansing. Look at, they're doing exactly what they're doing in the West Bank. And the West Bank, there is no Hamas, no Hezbollah. I think they have, they've been saying it, Greater Israel, the natural border for Lebanon is the Litani River. I hope I'm wrong. Anyway, to go back to your question, who are the players that will, who will be interested in Lebanon? Firas mentioned the new bloc, which is Pakistan. Pakistan a bit far, which is Egypt, Saudi, and Turkey. And for Egypt, Saudi, and Turkey, for the 3 of them, Lebanon is now of interest, because they see now the threat from Israel expansion is more than they see from Iran. They see a looming threat from Israel. I think that the Turks might get a bigger role in Lebanon, because that will give them depth in Syria. Syria is very important to them, is national security to them. Though now for Egypt, Lebanon is also important. Because they look at it from the Israeli point of view. Israel is a threat to Egypt, So but I would see that, I would bet that later on we would see more Turkish involvement in Lebanon. later on. I think this, but especially now that there is a rapprochement, there is a big rapprochement, especially with Egypt and with Saudi Arabia. But the Turks will not make a move in Lebanon unless they have the full blessing of Saudi Arabia, especially Saudi Arabia.
Thank you very much, Dania. Very clear. Firas, I wanted to ask you one question before I hand over to the audience. I already have a number of questions that have come through. And it relates to that grouping of Arab countries that we haven't really discussed that much in the course of the past 45 minutes, but which used to have a huge influence in Lebanon. Of course, I'm talking about the Gulf more generally, the GCC. How do you see, in terms of the work that you do, the interpretation of what's going on vis-a-vis the Lebanon file in particular, from the point of view of the Gulf? Do you see a more united consensus within the Gulf on this particular issue than perhaps on others? If there are divisions and divergences, how would you characterize them? What sort of camps exist in this regard? Or is it simpler than that, and there's only one or two countries that really have much interest anymore? Please.
Hisham, I'll start out by saying that speaking of the GCC as a monolith is going to be increasingly questionable for us moving forward. Particularly, but not exclusively, given the argument that I've laid out to you, that there are fissures that have emerged before the Iran war, particularly between Saudi and the UAE, but not exclusively. Bahrain is, while historically tethered to Saudi Arabia, increasingly now financially reliant on the UAE, and they're walking a fine line. Egypt, as you know, is making a choice, and that choice is, even though it is financially a beneficiary of the UAE largesse, is moving in a different direction. But let's stick to the GCC. The conflict and the war has only further fractured the GCC. When you hear the Emiratis talk about, well, where is, Arab unity and support? Where are the larger, more influential states when we needed them? And when you hear them question multilateral institutions that haven't delivered for them, the Arab League under the auspices of the Egyptians, the GCC under the auspices of the Saudis, the Organization of Islamic States, including Pakistan there, and their decision not to renew their $3.5 billion loan to the Pakistanis. The Saudis stepped in to help the Pakistanis as a result of that. You're not going to be talking about a united GCC anytime soon, let alone about a GCC that has one voice and one policy towards the issue of Lebanon. I think maybe in Lebanon's longer term interests, it has been forgotten and on the sidelines of the bigger picture issues in the region. Because if it wasn't, it would have to make much more difficult choices of which camp and which side it's going to be on. Again, we're talking about the post-Iranian order. We're not fully there yet. Lebanon's still going through the process. But this is all to tell you that Lebanon is not central to any of the visions of these countries. It's not central to MBS's view of Vision 2030 and the diversification of its economy. It won't be anytime soon. It's not central to the UAE and Vision 2040 and MBZ. I think what maybe I'd leave you with here is it's probably the most important to Israel, its national security, and the consequences of which direction Lebanon will go. It's also important to Turkey because of Turkish power projection into the Levant via Damascus. So I guess the question that we all ought to be asking ourselves is, when we're talking big picture, is Beirut going to line up with Damascus under a Turkish, Saudi-blessed bloc, or is it going to be in counterbalance and perhaps tension with Damascus, the historic tension between Beirut and Damascus, in a much more UAE, Israel affiliated lineup in the region? I don't think we have the answer to that yet, but if I'm to venture a guess, I would tell you that the Israelis care a lot more, and Lebanon is a lot more important to their national security interest than it is to the national security interest of Saudi Arabia or the UAE or anybody in the GCC for that matter.
Thank you very much. So we have quite a number of questions. We have some time. I won't say an amazing amount of time. I'm going to try to take maybe 2 questions at a time and send them over to you, simply in the interest of trying to get as many of these off the table before we have to wrap up. So the first one is from Doris in Palestine. And she has a two-worded question, but I'm going to focus on the latter in particular. If Hezbollah is the stated target, what does that mean politically and legally when the civilian toll, the displacement, and infrastructure damage in Lebanon continue to rise at this scale? And of course, I think it was you, May, at the beginning, framing it quite appropriately that there's hundreds of thousands displaced, quite a harsh civilian death toll. I think it was the latest numbers that I saw was it 350 in something crazy like 10 minutes of strikes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been quite intense. So perhaps Doris, perhaps May, if you could take that question. But then also Nadim Shahadi from Lebanon. Hello, Nadim. Question for Dania. It's a very direct question, Dania. He's saying, and he wants a clarification here. Do you mean to say that Iran should be the protector of Lebanon, i.e., that the country should move to the axis of resistance camp? I don't think he's being provocative, as much as I think he just wants you to clarify quite what sort of relationship you envisage here, which I'd be interested to hear as well. So perhaps Maya and then Dania.
Yeah, I think one of the most dangerous kind of debates, but it's also one of the most important debates, has been in Lebanon just between people is kind of this back and forth about who's committing more war crimes. I mean, it is a violation of international humanitarian law to put military infrastructure in civilian places. It's a violation of international humanitarian law to conduct a strike when the civilian harm, even if civilian infrastructure is being used for military purposes, to conduct a strike on that military target that would impose excessive harm to civilians. And I think being in Lebanon over the past year and a half, in particular, in the 2024 war and then onwards, we saw the Israeli military carry out extraordinarily precise airstrikes that targeted, just like the case that Makram was talking about, targeted IRGC commanders that were in a hotel in Beirut, causing a little bit of damage, but no other casualties besides those that were killed, those that were intended as the target. What was different about last Wednesday was just the intensity and the ferocity of that bombing and the civilian toll. I mean, all together there were more than 110 cumulatively of women, children, and elderly. The Israeli military has come out and said that it killed 250 Hezbollah fighters that day. For that to be true, there would have to be every military-aged male that was killed that day, plus several women would have had to be Hezbollah fighters. So we're questioning the numbers constantly when we're doing our reporting. They've only identified 5 people by name as far as Hezbollah commanders that were killed that day. So there's a question mark around 245 that were killed, and there hasn't been evidence provided as yet to verify that these were in fact military targets. So we're stuck in the situation where yes, there are military targets in civilian populations, but there's also a responsibility for any armed actor not to put military targets in civilian areas and to minimize the civilian harm to as part of any military operation. So and everybody else in Beirut is stuck with between these two armed actors and the various violations of international humanitarian law that are being carried out.
Thank you, Maya. Very clear. Dania, please. Mike.
Hello, Nadim. And I think that for sure I don't want Lebanon to be in the Iran axis, but politics is about pragmatism. Politics is the art of the possible. I'm saying we have an opportunity here. We need to take it. And politics should be driven by pragmatism and by strategic logic, not by hubris. We don't want Iran to have anything with us. No, this is an opportunity. We should take it. And I want to tell also, Nadim, speak that Hezbollah is not going to go away. Hezbollah is not the PLO that got hit Abu Ammar took his people, his folks, and they went to Tunisia. Hezbollah is very much embedded in the Shia population. So decommissioning them is a long-term process, and it involves, building a state, offering services to the Shia population and to the entire Lebanese. But to go back to your question, no, I don't want Lebanon to be in Iran axis, but if there is an opportunity, we should take it, and we can't really close all relation with Iran. It won't work. They kicked out the Iranian ambassador and he's still there. So, I think a government should not take a decision that it cannot enforce because it only shows it is weak. So what I'm calling for is pragmatism. Does that answer the question, Hisham? Do you think was I clear?
I think it does. I think it raises other questions, quite frankly. But that's not my. I'm the moderator and chair. مش هدخل. I have enough issues in other countries. So when it comes to, however, the next question, this is quite an interesting one. Nimrod saying, he's pointing out that there's a lot of reportage around the idea that U.S. pressure is due to produce a ceasefire tonight. And the question is, and I think I'll pose this to Firas. Do you think that if there is a ceasefire, A, will it last? B, will it strengthen, or for that matter, will it weaken the Lebanese government vis-a-vis Hezbollah?
I would be surprised if we have a full and unconditional ceasefire announced tonight. Well, conditional because one would presume that Hezbollah has to accept the ceasefire. There is no ceasefire if Hezbollah is continuing to launch rockets and missiles against Israel, and if the fighting on the ground in that buffer zone continues. Now, I would posit to you and everybody listening that Hezbollah and Iran are much weaker than they have been, that they probably stand to benefit from a ceasefire, which is why the Iranians had tried to lobby for it as a precondition, and that eventually they'd fall in line. But Israel hasn't achieved all its aims. It hasn't taken Bint Jbeil as of yet, last I checked, and so there's some room to go. I think what the Israelis are more likely to do is to agree on a de-escalatory path in Lebanon, and to maybe put forward some conditions under which they're ready to accept a full ceasefire. A more likely outcome is a return to pre-war, pre-March 2nd status ante, in which you have a nominal ceasefire, but it is a hot and contested one. So Israel will continue to take shots at Hezbollah targets wherever they emerge and wherever they see them, if and until the Lebanese state is fully able to push back against Hezbollah. Because I'll be honest with ourselves. In the year and some since the last war in 2024, since the November ceasefire has come into place, Hezbollah was able to rearm, not according to me or anybody, according to them and their sources. $1 billion of Iranian money came through, and the Lebanese state did very little to interdict or stop that process. And the IRGC, hundreds of them, we found out, were still in Beirut, rebuilding, organizing, and even in charge of command and control. So until that issue is dealt with effectively by the Lebanese government, and it will need some time, I don't think you're going to get to an unconditional and full ceasefire in Lebanon.
Thank you. So Makram, I've got two that I'm sending your way. They're on the same theme, but slightly different aspects here, and I think that you're very well placed to answer this. So the first one is, who are, if any, the credible actors internal to Lebanon, but external to Lebanon as well, that could really support the current government? I mean, you've given your appraisal of the government. I think that you have given some positive appraisals of it, and you've also given some harsh critiques of it. But I think that you broadly wanted to succeed, and that, frankly, the frustration that you seem to be expressing is about the fact that it hasn't been able to do what you think it had actually claimed that it would do. So what where do you think that they could find that power, right? Who could support it internally? Who could support it externally? And this leads on to the second question, which is the state of Lebanon lacks leverage with regards to these talks in Washington. How could here they're asking how could the European Union in particular, but I would put it to you, how could anybody support Lebanon to build the leverage that it needs to have a real deal vis-a-vis the Israelis and more broadly speaking, just the strength of the Lebanese state?
Let's start with the
Makram?
last question. To our European
Okay.
friends who have access to policy circles, stop funding Hezbollah. Stop sending money to Hezbollah-supported NGOs who use this money to money launder and do stuff which are basically equally to killing us. The French have done horribly, and that's why they are not heard by the Israelis or even the Lebanese. Macron insists to sell us off to the Iranians. And when we challenge him, they say, no, we are friends historically and all of this. The only country that can help Lebanon is the Americans, but this will never happen until the Lebanese help themselves, meaning President Aoun should stop when he's bullying, when he's giving them false promises, when he stood in front of the Lebanese nation in his inauguration speech and gave us all these rosy words, he failed miserably. I feel really threatened by the fact that IRGC are using not fake passports. The Secretary General of Lebanon has given access to this militia, which basically endangers the economy of the diaspora. Lebanon lives on the diaspora. If this ceasefire is to stand, the Gulf will start systematically looking into the Lebanese living abroad, and this will cause a big problem to us. I believe the Israelis can actually help us by reining in many of their people who say stupid stuff about colonizing the South. I know these are not mainstream Israeli voices, but yet it is equally damaging. And I think what should be done is that the international community, particularly Europe, should stop dreaming of the fact that Hezbollah could turn into a political institution. Hezbollah was never established to do politics. It was never established to do resistance. Hezbollah was established in 1985 to be able to found an Islamic Republic, and it technically did. But this Islamic Republic only applies to the poor Shiites of Lebanon who will never return home. So I believe the only way forward, and this issue of leverage, when people, Hisham, talk about leverage, what kind of leverage Lebanon could get when they talk about arming the Lebanese army? Are they really serious about this? Do we want something like the Egyptian army, or the Jordanians and the Egyptians are fighting for their sovereignty? It doesn't mean they have a perfect relationship with the Israelis, but at least when you have a shooting on the border because one truck driver decided to avenge the Palestinians, they don't drive all the way to Cairo. So again, one has to be very, very realistic. What we're going for, we won't have direct normalization between these two countries, but stop promoting Hezbollah's words about leverage. Real leverage starts by being invited to a table which you come prepared for. And I think Nada Ahmedi yesterday was prepared for this, because ultimately whatever she does is much better than what Naim Asim and his gang could actually give us.
Thank you, Makram. Also interesting to hear that point on normalization, because of course in Washington, as I'm sure Firas has heard many times, there seems to be this idea that Lebanon could possibly normalize with the state of Israel sometime as early as next Tuesday, constantly being the case. I heard the same thing about Saudi for the last 2 years, and it always baffled me as to why people don't actually listen to the countries that they're talking about. So good for you to clarify that. There's a question here about which I think builds on what Dania and Firas were talking about in terms of this block from Anne in the US. And she says, how committed are the countries of the region to provide assistance and a counterbalance to Israel She puts Israel and the US here, which I don't think is quite what she means, but perhaps in their determination of their own destiny, specifically in the case of Lebanon, which we to date have failed to see in Gaza. Dania, maybe you could take that, seeing as you described this block as well.
So just to make sure I understood the question, what are countries in the region doing to counterbalance
how committed they
Israel?
are. So I suppose how, I mean, you're talking more practically here. The question is saying how committed are they really?
Well,
and
so far we
I'm going
haven't
to
seen any
assume that
commitment.
she's asking how genuine they are. How serious are they really about providing assistance and a counterbalance?
Well, I don't know. I mean, so far we haven't seen, but what I was saying, I think from the discussion I've had, the Turks will have a greater role later on because of the dynamics and, as Firas say, the looming Israeli danger. Well, we don't see so far, for example, Saudi and Turkey have been very committed to Syria. And this is why when Shara went and for discussion, he had a much stronger backing, much stronger foundation when he discussed with the Israeli, and still nothing came out of it. And he said, Gebeily said very clearly, it's because their expansionism, we couldn't reach an agreement. You don't see this support to Lebanon. You don't see Saudi and Turkey throwing all their weight behind Lebanon. It might come later on, but so far we don't see it. We don't see it. What I was said before, we might see Turkey stepping in as later on, but so far we don't see anyone, honestly. France says, but beyond the tweets of Makram, we don't see any real support.
So building on that, but moving to Firas, just for a moment here, this idea about leverage, support, it's clear that I think everybody agrees that Lebanon doesn't have much leverage in these talks. The question then becomes, is that leverage or no leverage, is it a better idea to go for it or a better idea not to go for it? That's a separate question. But let's imagine that there was a way to give quote unquote leverage. How? And where would it come from? What would the leverage be? And how could Lebanon be supported in order to provide it with that leverage?
Yeah. Well, on the question of leverage, let's start by determining what the objective is. Because if the objective is exercising state authority, starting from, perhaps I would posit, Beirut itself, then moving outward from that to eventually controlling the south and the Beqa and the north, then I think what the Israeli ambassador said yesterday, the Israeli ambassador to Washington, it was very interesting. He said, well, we discovered that we and the Lebanese have a lot in common, and we in many ways are on the same page. The issue of disarming Hezbollah is a Lebanese demand, separate of Israel. It is the Lebanese government that took a decision to dismantle Hezbollah's military and security infrastructure. Hezbollah is threatening openly, together with Iran, the Lebanese prime minister and the legitimately elected and formed Lebanese government of which it is a part. So in that sense, if that is at least one of the objectives, I think Israel here can be viewed arguably as something that is contributing to what the Lebanese themselves want to achieve, which is a weakened Iran and a weakened Hezbollah, and the restoration of a government that's able to exercise its authority. Now, that doesn't mean that Lebanon's interests overlap with Israel across the board. They certainly don't. And when it comes to the liberation of Lebanese land and the south, well, that's a point of tension. And unless you do actually see a successful dismantlement of Hezbollah, you're unlikely to see that territory, at least the smaller version of the buffer zone, which is that of the 7 to 10 kilometers, return to Lebanon. But Lebanon is also not obliged to sign on to any normalization and any peace treaty with Israel as long as that continues to be the case. So I would argue to you that one point of leverage on that issue, if the Trump administration truly wants to see Lebanon join the Abrahamic Accords one day, inshallah, certainly not Tuesday, nor the following Tuesday, it would have to compel Israel to withdraw from Lebanese land and settle the differences along that blue line. I don't see anything materializing in terms of normalization short of that. But it's important for us to start by talking what exactly are the Lebanese objectives, because in some of those, to be honest, intellectuals and analysts, we have to recognize that there is an overlap with Israel, and in some of those, there isn't.
So, Maya, I'm going to turn to you now because we have a question. We have a question, particularly about media. Don't worry, it's not about Reuters.
Oh God.
No,
It's easier to answer if it's about Reuters. It's more challenging to answer if it's about someone else.
No complaints about Reuters, but generally speaking, and I agree with the importance of the question. Although I suspect it goes further beyond, the particular media he's speaking of. But we have a question in Lebanon, Basim, and he's drawing out the role of. He's talking about pro-Iran media.
Okay.
I imagine the point is not simply relevant to pro-Iran media, because I think that you probably have a number of different quote unquote parallel universes that exist in different types of media in Lebanon. But he's mentioning pro-Iran media in making hundreds of thousands of people live in a kind of metaverse-like world detached from reality, and that the role of such media is more dangerous than many thousands of missiles. I would presume that this is not simply about pro-Iran media. I would imagine that actually there's a lot of different ideological makeups within Lebanon that dehumanize the other side or multiple sides, which is not going to be good for rebuilding civil society once this is all over one day. But perhaps you could expound on that. Is this a genuine issue? Is it limited to certain arenas, or is it more broadly about how media is working out, and maybe not just quote unquote normal media or historic media or legacy media, but different types of social media? Perhaps you can give us a window into that.
Yeah, I mean, Lebanon obviously has been historically seen and enjoys having this title of having one of the most liberal information spaces and media spaces across the region, and I think it's important for observers and for people who are interested in trying to build a bigger picture and even a deeper picture to try to listen to all of them. If you sit and listen to Al Manar all day, then you will have a very specific perspective of how this war is going and what Lebanon should be doing and what the failures of the Lebanese state are. If you watch MTV, you will have a very different perspective of how the war is going, but you will also have a perspective of how the Lebanese state.
So not to interrupt you,
reference.
but if you could maybe let the audience know what you meant by MTV, because they probably have a wrong
Lebanese in music, yes, unfortunately, music television is dead these days. No, it's MTV Lebanon, which is more closely affiliated to a kind of pro-West and clearly kind of anti-Hezbollah.
So Kylie Minogue does not show up on this channel on a regular basis.
I wish she should. I mean, that's where she should be these days. But it's so I, for example, when I try to absorb what's happening and what the political takes are, I will watch all the different channels. And Lebanese radio was also excellent. So I will get in my car if I'm stuck in kind of endless hours of Lebanese traffic, and I have saved on my 1 through 6, going from the most pro-Hezbollah to the most anti-Hezbollah radio stations. And I just go through and I listen to all of them. And you will learn about every single community and what they're absorbing and how they think things are going and what's shaping their political perspectives. And I think it's an extremely instructive way to at least get to know what people are talking about and what they think is happening. And the divides are enormous. They are enormous. And I don't recommend anyone listens to the Noor radio, which is the pro-Hezbollah radio station with their windows rolled down, in the neighborhood that I live in, because that does not go well with who my neighbors are, who are not very pro-Hezbollah. But I mean, it's a really important kind of just exercise to do. And I don't think a lot of Lebanese do that. I do it as part of my work, and I think it's an important habit to build. And I'm sure that many Lebanese, who usually watch Al Manar, if they were to watch MTV, they would say this is incitement, this is hate speech, and vice versa. So that's how big those gaps are.
But you would say then that that the issue of, let's put it as incitement, as hate speech, do you think it's limited to one or two media stations, or just in terms of? I'll come to you a second, Makram. Would you say that it's limited to one station or two, or is it a much broader kind of issue from your standpoint as a journalist who's in the media space?
No, I think it's not that these stations are necessarily promoting hate speech as a policy. I think they can sometimes host people that will make insightful statements, but then you have the entire separate sphere of Twitter, of X, which is a whole different space in which you have obviously, no gatekeepers, and a much more hostile space to have these conversations in. And they do, I mean, and that type of speech, hate speech, insightful speech is there. Again, I don't want to ascribe the responsibility for that to the media stations per se. It will exist whether or not those stations are promoting it, because it will be on X and it will be kind of in other spaces where there are no gatekeepers.
Okay, thank you. Makram, I'll go to you quickly because I need to go on to another question. We're running low on time.
Just a small disclaimer. When we talk about media and we talk about the hate speech, it's one thing. But when we have hate speech as well as a militia with a hit team, which called Division 121, which has killed Rafi al-Hariri, has killed Luqman Slim behind me, killed Samir Asir. They tried to arrest me a couple of times for interviews I gave and accuse me of being a Zionist collaborator. I won't accept anyone to put people like me who are just saying that we don't want to die with people who are trying to kill us. I don't accept anyone, especially people in the West, to put us that there's two opposing points of views. No, there's a militia that was running over $5 billion of Coptagon from Syria, and they have turned Lebanon into a hellhole. So again, we can talk about media, and I do agree with Maya that we should definitely be very objective in this. But at the end of the day, these people have an executive arm that kill us for a living. So Luqman behind me only died just because he wrote. He never actually hurt anyone in his life. And as it stands, the Beirut port explosion has been derailed by Nasrallah, not by anyone else. Nasrallah was the face of this derailment. But at the end of the day, people who are heroes of impunity are the people who accuse us of saying sectarian stuff when we simply say we don't want to be part of your suicidal journey.
Thank you, Makram. Maya, I do have a follow-up, and it was directed at you. Don't worry, it's not a difficult one. It might be amusing as much as we can have any amusement in this. So my children really like Lego. It seems that Iranian propagandists also like Lego because we keep on seeing these new Lego style clips coming out of Iran and spreading rapidly on TikTok and Instagram. The questioner is asking, what does this tell us about information warfare and how it's changing? And I think probably more than one of us have been targeted by different phishing exercises because precisely of analysis. But how seriously should we take this kind of content as a factor in shaping public opinion and political narratives around the conflict? And then I have something for Dania before we wrap up.
The way that people are absorbing news, I mean, I'm not going to say anything particularly enlightening. I think everybody has observed this, but the way that people are absorbing news, whether it's domestic news or whether it's, geopolitical developments of extreme significance, like what we've seen over the past 6 weeks, has completely changed. I mean, people ask me where they can find what I write. They're like, why aren't you tweeting? I can't find it on Twitter. Because they don't open the Reuters news website and look for it there. So it's translated into memes. It's translated into very kind of shorthand ways of understanding the world. And it's now gotten to the point where it's not just kind of political commentators doing it, to one another. It's gotten to the point where government officials are now communicating in that way. It puts us in a difficult position.
So are we to expect the Lebanese government will also start producing Lego TikToks? Please say yes.
I think it would be an improvement on their communication strategy.
Oh.
Let's put it that way.
Ouch. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna hand this question over to Dania. We're running low on time, but Dania, if you would please be concise and brief in this regard. And it was a question directed to you in particular, so you shouldn't feel targeted, but it certainly provoked a certain response. If Lebanon refuses, sorry about that, if Lebanon refuses to engage with the U.S.-led negotiation track, what exactly is your alternative? Let a devastating war continue or hand the Lebanese file back to Iran, which is precisely what Hezbollah wants, etc. So maybe we ignore the second part, quite frankly, but the first part I think is a very legitimate question. What do you suggest if they do not go to Washington?
If
What
they
is
didn't
your
go, what
alternative?
they should have done, well, I should have, if I were the president, I would have sent a delegation to Islamabad. I would have lobbied with the Iranian, I would have lobbied with the Turks, I would have lobbied with the Saudi, with the Pakistani to get, my voice
So they
heard.
should have
And I
gone to
would
Islamabad.
Yeah, I would have sent a delegation to Islamabad, honestly. Not only several countries send delegation to Islamabad. I would have worked more on diplomacy because myself, I cannot get anything from the Israelis. Maybe I would have sent a delegation with the Israelis, but the maximum you can get from them if you're extremely smart is to buy time because you're not gonna get anything from them.
So I will just say that in terms of Islamabad, and I don't mean to push back on this, but there are quite a few countries that wanted to go to Islamabad who were targeted by the Iranians in the war, and they were not allowed to go. So
Well,
Lebanon
we didn't
probably would
even
not have had
ask
that
to go.
choice.
We didn't even ask to go.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask each of you to give a 1 minute summation, but please 1 minute summation. Any last final thoughts that you had, and Makram, if I could please start with you.
Yes, many people are happy, including myself, that there's a potential ceasefire. However, one should not assume this would last long. What's more important is to always keep your eye on the ball. This is a security-minded intelligence outfit which will use this time to resupply and to strengthen its grip over the Shiites of Lebanon. So anyone who is hoping for someone who has killed our prime minister and has killed Lebanese all over and over again, and when we talk about leverage, perhaps we should find a way to have leverage over Hezbollah before we have leverage over Israel. And this is where I think the problem starts. The Lebanese are too nice and too decent to speak up. People like me who have done so have been accused of being hawkish. Asking for the implementation of the constitution is not hawkish. This is what patriotism is about.
Thank you, Makram. I will endorse the comment about Lebanese people being very nice. I won't say too nice, but because I don't think they can get too nice. But God bless. Dania, please, 1 minute.
Well,
Please.
I think in terms of foreign relation, I think Lebanon should develop his relation, should have his eye on the new alliance, which is Egypt, Turkey, Saudi, and Pakistan, and should develop relation with them. We're a small state. We cannot navigate by ourselves. We need an ally, and I think this is the ally that can bring Lebanon on its feet in terms of being to fend off the Israeli aggression and contain the Iranian influence inside Lebanon.
Okay, thank you. Firas, please, final words.
Yeah, again, much has been said. I don't know what to add. I would say the following. Lebanon has entered a transition period. It was a country under occupation and domination for decades. Transitions, by definition, are perhaps unstable. And increasingly, as Hezbollah's war with Israel begins to wind down, and I do think that we're in the process of winding these down, whether we get to a ceasefire today, tomorrow, or in a month from now, I am increasingly concerned about domestic stability, given all the issues that we've heard here, given the fact that Hezbollah's disarmament is a Lebanese demand. The majority of Lebanese want it and insist on it. and are now presented with more favorable regional conditions that are conducive of trying to achieve that. But also given the fact that that process is not going to be smooth, and that Hezbollah and those supporting will certainly attempt to push back. So Lebanon is on the right course. The direction of travel is a positive one to my mind, but it's certainly going to be a bumpy ride for the coming couple of years, I would say, as the Lebanese state tries to assert its sovereignty and a greater degree of control over decision making and the fate of its people.
Thank you very much for us. Hopefully it will not be as long as that, but one can only hope. And finally, Tumaya, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And thank you for a really obviously lively discussion. I mean, these discussions are happening in many Lebanese households. It's nice to have them even remotely with all of you. We were just getting some updates from the Security Cabinet, and it looks like it's still ongoing. And Netanyahu was saying, it's too early to say how talks with Iran will end and if they will progress and all of that. But it looks like it's not over yet. So they might still be discussing what is to happen here. I mean, I think what we've unpacked here is that Lebanon has it is possibly the single most kind of geopolitically significant moment for this country. Internally, regionally, internationally, there are a lot of challenges to untangle, and there have been a lot of questions raised today about whether the Lebanese officials who are sitting in power now will be able to fully untangle them and do what it takes to create some kind of a sustainable settlement domestically and regionally. These are challenges that I think no Lebanese government really could be prepared to handle, frankly, because they're just all coming at once, and they are at so many different social, economic, and political and security levels. I don't have anything, any insight on what they'll be able to achieve in this year, but I think obviously the next couple of weeks are going to be crucial to see how they can turn around the momentum of the past couple of days into something that is good news for all of us.
One hopes. I want to thank all of you for all of your perspectives, your contributions. I certainly learned a lot. I'm sure that our audience did as well. And I appreciate that you were all willing to have this discussion, especially at a very difficult time. I mean, several of you are living under fire, literally. And even those of you who are not actually there, your families are. I know that your hearts are connected to what's going on, and I appreciate that you're willing to have this discussion in such a civil manner. With that, my thanks, but then I would like to hand over to Mani Jed, the Director of IMEO, for her final remarks.
Thank you to Dr. Hellyer and our panel for a highly insightful briefing, and thank you to our audience for being with us and engaging so thoughtfully. I do want to leave you with this thought. Times of tension demand more than immediate reaction. Exchanges like this clarify the complexities and decisions that will shape where the region goes next. And with that, we close our public briefing today. Goodbye for now.